Do you want a beautifully painted army in 48 hours or less? Well, I want a solid gold toilet seat, but we don't always get what we want, now do we? Age of Sigmar 4th edition is right around the corner, and I am pumped to start a brand new Skaven army. And I've painted my share of Warhammer armies at this point, and there is one important factor that I've learned throughout that process, and that is army painting is a spectrum. On one end, you have speed, and on the other end, you have quality. So I've painted armies as fast as I possibly could, and I know that they don't look nearly as good as I'd like them to. And I've also painted armies to the best of my ability at the time, and those armies took so long that they never got finished. So in preparation for my new Skaven army today, I'm going to test something different. I'm going to find the right middle ground between speed and quality that's just right for me. My goal today, over the course of 3 different models, is to utilize just the right amount of tricks to keep the army painting process quick while ending up with the best painted army I've ever done. My first test subject is this cute little storm vermin with a machete on a stick. I'm going to dive right into the painting process by using contrast and speed paints directly over a black primer. The point of this test goes back to something you've probably heard me speak about before, and that is the massive amount of time we spend getting clean base coats all over our models. And the whole point of this first step is to avoid that time-intensive base coating process. I'm just going to slap down some colors right over the black primer. And because these contrast and speed paints are translucent, they're actually going to meld right into the dark primer underneath. And that darkening is exactly what we want to happen. You see, these colors will act as our shadow colors for each surface that we're going to paint later, allowing us to jump directly into laying out our midtones and highlights. Now, I've done tests similar to this in other models before, and if you want to see a more in-depth breakdown in painting to an even higher level, check out my Tyrannid video on a similar subject. As I build up my layers over these shadow tones, I'm not thinning my paint at all. I'm using it thick right out of the bottle. This is so we get opaque coverage in just one coat. We don't have to waste time doing multiple layers. One thing you'll notice across all 3 of my tests today is that I'm spending as much time painting the skin and fur on each of these models as I am painting everything else. And this is because it's the easiest area on most models to really boost the overall quality and look of the paint job, allowing you to rush through other smaller details without much time or worry. I also spend more time on painting the skin because, quite frankly, it's one of my favorite things to paint, and that's actually really important. It's not just a throwaway sentence in the middle of a YouTube video. I think the single most important factor for army painting is building in the time to enjoy what gives you the most satisfaction. If you find yourself rushing through every possible step in a large miniature painting project like an army, you'll find that miniature painting becomes a stress inducer rather than a stress reliever. You need to give yourself the breathing room to really enjoy what you like to paint, and those sections that you enjoy painting the most will end up looking so much better because you liked doing it. If you force yourself to rush through everything in a painting project, you're going to burn yourself out, and you're either going to not finish the army project at all, or you're going to be so burnt out by the time you've completed the army, you're not going to want to come back to the painting desk for the foreseeable future. Now, as I'm analyzing this model, as I'm testing with it, I'm realizing that even though these darker sections aren't pure black because of the contrast paint over top of them, they're still really quite dark. In many areas, the jump between that shadow color to the mid-tone layer is much too stark, which gives the model a rougher finish than what I was hoping for. That's not to say that this test was a failure. In fact, I really think this is a nice, relaxing way to quickly paint a bunch of models. I can see myself just mentally checking out and painting a whole bunch of models in this way while I'm watching a movie or listening to a podcast. Now I do want to touch on how I did the metallics here because it's my favorite quick way to do true metallic metals, and I've copied it through the rest of my tests today because I'm really happy with it. And that method is mostly just a traditional Games Workshop style, where I put down a base coat of my metallics, I go over with a black wash and a brown wash, and then I can come back in with some edge highlights and my own preferred way for quick and impactful weathering. My preferred rust paint is Doom Bull Brown, thinned down with 1 part paint to about 4 parts water, and this creates a realistic rust that I can build up with a couple layers if I want it more impactful. And you can do the same thing with any turquoise paint for oxidation over coppers and bronzes. And then with just a little bit of those edge highlights at the end, we've got great true metallics. And then a little bit of my favorite dirty down moss right on the cobblestones, and we've got our first test model complete. I gotta say that while I'm testing and being critical of the results, overall I think this guy looks pretty good. And this is a really straightforward basic layering over a brushed on undershading effect. It can be done quite quickly, and you don't need a lot of experience or expertise in miniature painting to pull this off. And maybe I'm gonna regret saying this when I've got 80 or more clan rats to paint for my army, but for my next test, I'm gonna try an approach that will give me a little bit more of a clean, more vibrant colored look for a final model. Which brings us to that second model, a fanatical little plague priest. Now the first thing you'll notice is that I sprayed him from above with a white ink over a black primer. What this is going to do is give us a lot more vibrance to our colors compared to the pure black primer, while still keeping those shadow areas quite dark. I'm going to use a different combination of colors for the skin on this rat. I think something with a nice rich red for the shadow color will give us more vibrancy on the model altogether. And while I was doing this, I was realizing that it would be pretty sweet if the entire army was made up of all different rats with different fur and skin tone variations to really bring some uniqueness to the army. After all, there's a million different variations of human skin tones, so why shouldn't rats be any different? I like the idea of not getting bored of painting the exact same skin colors across every single rat in my army. This really should help me from getting burnt out over the entire project. And these are the kinds of ideas that you need to be open to while you're in the middle of a painting project, an army project included. Why not just dive into something that excites you, a unique idea, a new test, something that you've never done before, because that's the kind of thing that makes miniature painting so fun to do. I mean, mini painting is art after all. There aren't any rules, so why are we self-imposing them? Just paint whatever you want, however you want. Today's video is brought to us by Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus. Tacticus is the definitive tactical mobile game for Warhammer 40k, where you can collect and upgrade over 60 Warhammer 40k champions in quick battles on the go. The tactical planning and strategy is what makes Warhammer so fun to play on the tabletop. And Tacticus really does an amazing job of combining strategy with a wide array of factions and characters from the 40k universe. I also love that there's always new factions and heroes being released, and because I've really enjoyed how some of the factions play, I'm actually considering starting a new army for the tabletop. So use the QR code on your screen or my link down in the video description to download Warhammer 40k Tacticus for free. And all players, new or existing, can use code NINJON5 in the game settings menu for a surprise gift. So download Tacticus for free now, and who knows, it may just end up being your new favorite pastime while sitting on the toilet. The other main thing I'm testing out on this rat is using wet blending on all of the larger sections of the model. What I do is take 2 paints, one dark and one light, and I do not thin them at all. I place the dark color based on the guide from our Zenithal priming. If there's more of that black primer showing and it's going to be in more shadow, I place the dark color there. I then place the lighter color on the areas that I haven't painted with that first darker color. And because I'm working fast with thick paint, that gives us working time, so I can actually blend the colors together directly on the model. And as your brush swishes back and forth across the surface of the model, you get to experience one of the most satisfying things in all of miniature painting, and that is seeing color blending right on your model in real time. Now, one thing I've learned about wet blending is while it looks pretty straightforward and easy watching somebody else do it, it does take a little bit of practice for you to get really the hang of the feel for how it works. The great thing is there's no better way to practice a technique like this over and over again is on an army, which is why it's a great excuse to implement something like this so I myself can get even better at wet blending across the entire project. One tip I really want to share about wet blending is that you really don't want to overwork any given area. If you don't get that perfect blend after swishing your brush back and forth a few times over an area, just stop and let that area dry. You can come back in with either your brighter color or darker color, or redo the wet blend entirely from the beginning to get a smoother look, and it happens pretty quickly. To me, wet blending is one of the more interesting aspects of miniature painting. On one hand, it really is one of the fastest ways to make big, impactful changes and blends really smoothly, even on small models. On the other hand, it is a little bit finicky, and you do need to practice it to get better at it. But those that are willing to put in a little bit of work over the course of a few projects will really quickly get better at this technique, which will really improve the speed and the quality of your miniature painting as a whole. Also, the more contrast you put between the dark color and the bright color that you wet blend, the more dramatic your model will look. So don't be afraid to use wild colors in the dark and bright spectrum to really make your models pop. To me, the biggest benefit of wet blending is it greatly speeds up the first 75% of the painting of any surface large enough for you to use it on. Even on this plume of smoke, I quickly blend a pure black and a light gray to get the general blend before coming in with white paint to define the brightest areas I wanted to punch up with the neon green. I'm putting down the pure white before the green because it will really give us a great bright foundation for that fluorescent color to really shine. If I tried to put it directly over a gray or a black, the color just wouldn't have this kind of punch. I can then use a thinned glaze of a contrast paint or an ink where our neon green colors meet our smoke, and that ties these colors together and gives us that iconic green warpstone glow that Skaven are known for, while still looking great and vibrant at the tabletop. With that, our second rat is complete, and I gotta say, I'm really happy with how this one turned out. I really like how vibrant and how clean he looks compared to the first rat, and I got to spend time using one of my favorite miniature painting techniques in wet blending. Now, the downside of this second test is that it took me about 25% longer to paint this rat than it did the first one. And that's largely because I didn't have any of those undertones that I used in the first step of test 1 to just leave unpainted. For this second test, I needed to make sure I hit every little nook and cranny and those hard to reach areas, and that takes time. Which is a great segue because that's exactly what I'm going to try to improve on for test 3. My goal is to keep a clean, crisp look while saving ourselves some time by painting all those underbits that nobody likes to waste time with. The model we'll use for test number 3 is a Clan Eshin rat, and these rats are ninja rats. Seriously, it does not get any cooler than that. In addition to the white Zenithal spray from above, I also sprayed a red-violet from below on this model. The point here is to use this as a sort of atmospheric light, so all of the downward facing surfaces will already have some color on them, so we don't need to paint them if we don't want to. Once that purple is down, we can start painting our skin, and I'm just avoiding that pure purple in the shadows, leaving it untouched, and we're just going to build up our midtones and highlights on everywhere else. Seeing as this ninja rat is obviously our teenage dirtbag of today's test models, I'm going with a dirty white skin / fur color on him. It should work out well with the dark emo hood I'll be painting on him soon enough. You'll probably notice that outside of using the Zenithal white and now this purple from below, I haven't been using the airbrush at all throughout these test models. And no, I'm not doing that just so these painting approaches are applicable for people without airbrushes. I actually think that an airbrush doesn't really speed up your miniature painting time unless 40% or more of any given model is of a single surface and color that using an airbrush for will actually speed up the whole time. If you're busting out your airbrush just to do the pants on every dude in your army, you aren't saving time. You're also dancing with the devil in the pale moonlight because there's a good chance that you're going to clog up that airbrush over such a long painting session. And cleaning out clogs of dried acrylic paint so your airbrush will work again will take way longer than any time you saved by using it in the first place. An airbrush is a tool, just like anything else. It's really, really good at certain things, but that doesn't mean we should force ourselves to use it when it's not the best approach to do so. I got a silly confession to make here, something you guys probably are all doing already, but I really underestimated how valuable it is to use contrast and speed paints on tiny little bullshit details that would take forever to just layer up and do all the little highlights when just one coat of this and then one extra edge highlight will get them done so much faster, and they're not going to make your paint job look worse because they're just tiny little details anyway. Again, you probably already knew that. My brain tends to work in ones and zeros, and I thought if I used contrast paint, that means I have to use it everywhere, and that's not necessarily how it has to be. There is a downside of using those contrast paints or even washes in this third test specifically, and that is they want to flow into the cracks and darker areas. And while we were trying to keep those areas clean and bright purple for this effect, I kind of don't have that option with washes and contrast paint. Now, there's not a lot we can do to avoid this without being really slow and precise in our application of the contrast paints and washes, which honestly makes me pretty bummed out, but this is a test after all, and we'll have to see how it looks once complete to see if this still pulls off the look we're going for, even though we got the washes and the contrast paints in the shadows. And since we already had this nice purple transition coming from below, I decided to just lean into that on the base and just do a bit of edge highlighting to really define the areas down in that base as the source of our glow. This would make basing much easier for an entire army if we're okay with purple bases everywhere. With our Ninja Rat now complete, we now have all three tests done. So the question we now need to ask ourselves is, which of these three models, or which of the specific things we tried on each of these models, could we combine together to make the best looking army in a reasonable amount of time? And I do want your thoughts on this below down in the comment section, but know that like all things artistic, it's subjective as to which one looks the best. But what's more important to me is that I got to test out some different techniques and tricks to formulate my plan of attack for my next army. For my first model, I confirmed how I wanted to paint my metallics. That's pretty straightforward and easy to do, but gives us a great weathered look. From the second model, I learned that wet blending bright, punchy colors over a Zenithal Prime really gives us an impactful look in not much time. And from my third model, I learned that while I don't want to use this purple under shading across an entire army, I did confirm that I wanted to have a wide variety of fur and skin tones across the entire army, and painting this white fur was really, really fun. Also, I reminded myself of how much time we can save and really have good effect by using contrast paints over small bullshit details. Thanks for hanging out today as we prepped for my next Age of Sigmar 4th edition army. I hope that if you either have a current army project or you're excited to start a new one, that you picked up something that'll help you. I'm really excited for new rat models, and I know I probably don't need to buy any more miniatures, but when has that ever stopped us? If you enjoy my videos and you want to support me in making more, why don't you check out my brand new merch store that's linked down in the video description. I've got some brand new stuff that I didn't have before, like beanies, roll-out desk mats, so you can get paint all over this instead of your mom's antique armoire. There's embroidered aprons. There's a new really nice high-quality metal water bottle, but mine's upstairs dirty and I'm too lazy to wash it, so you have to take my word for it. You can also join me in my clan of Ninja Rats over at the Ninja on Patreon, where you get a small bit of cheese every time you make it through the maze, as well as some other fun rewards like hanging out on Discord. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss next week's new video. And speaking of next week, sometime between now and then, make sure you find time in your day to slay the Gray. Age of Sigmar 4th edition is right around the corner, and I don't know about you, but I can't get the line right.